the Via Stoica Podcast with Brendan and Benny. Powered by viastoica.com, your home for coaching, workshops, quotes, and Stoic content that inspires. Welcome to the Via Stoica Podcast. We're here today back, and I'm joined by Brendan. Brendan, how are you doing today?
Benny, I am doing wonderful. How are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm doing excellent, mainly because we have a very special guest today who's joined us all the way from Greece. She's at the moment. We're talking to Anya Leonard. She's the co-founder and the director of Classical Wisdom. She has a master's in sociology of the University of Edinburgh. She has a major in philosophy and the history of maths, of science, right? A lot of these things. She's written a book. Is it about poetry, right? It's about Sappho, the lost poetress.
That was actually a children's book about Sappho, the lost poetess, which, was a lot of fun to put together.
Oh, yeah, I definitely want to hear more about that and all the things that you're doing. But after this brief introduction, I wanted to kind of pass it over to you and tell us a little bit, especially the audience, who you are and what we can learn from you.
Well, thank you guys for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to people who are passionate about philosophy and the ancient world, and I could just totally geek out on this subject, so it's always wonderful to geek out with other people. But yeah, basically, as you said, I run Classical Wisdom, and it's a site dedicated to the ancient world. So we try to cover, I usually say we're niche, that in regards to covering from about like 1200 BC to around 300 AD, sometimes even going to the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire, from Hadrian's Wall up in the UK over to Egypt down to North Africa. And we delve into the world of the classics by sort of the interdisciplinary nature of it too. So philosophy, mythology, history, because one of the really frustrating but actually genuinely rewarding aspects of the classical world is things aren't fit in neat little silos, and they kind of all meld into each other. So we try to kind of give that take a step back and see the sort of broad picture of the ancient world. So I've been doing it now for about 12 years, I think. I studied initially at St. John's College, which is a great books program in Annapolis. For those who know it, it's kind of a strange school. And as you say, went on to Edinburgh. But then I kind of did a whole other world of stuff. I, lived in Dubai and Taiwan. I did app developing and all sorts of different things, and then started Classical Wisdom with a fellow named Bill Bonner, and he owns actually a financial publishing house, a huge one called Agora, but he also owns Le Belette, a French publishing house that is in Paris, and one of the last kind of critical translations of the ancient world that are being published. So you can imagine it doesn't make a lot of money. It's kind of a philanthropic cause. And so I was sort of brought in to find a way to make the classics self-sustainable. And that was sort of my goal, because trends come and go, grants, academies, things like that. And if you can find a way to show its relevance to the modern public, that's a way to kind of keep that torch alive. So I did it under Agora for a few years, and then we very amicably left because, as you said, they're actually dedicated to the financial world. And since then it's gone really well. I moved over to Substack about 2 years ago. We're always in the very top between 2 and 7. So very happy to say, and enjoying bringing the love of the ancient world to modern audiences.
Yeah, no, you do a great job at that, right? And I've looked at the website, and I've seen you also, present certain, topics on different shows and on different live shows. I saw you on the Donald Robertson one about anger. I really love that one where you dissected it with all the classic, I was like, oh, we got to have you on the show. So I'm so happy that you agreed to be here. And so you kind of mentioned that goal of the classical wisdom. And why do you think that this classical philosophy, the classical wisdom, is so important and valuable to our young minds now, right? To our modern day minds?
Well, this sort of fundamental knowledge and way of thinking about things have inspired people for literally thousands of years. And it is remarkable because the influence of the classics is profound. So I always say even though the classics that time period is interesting in and of itself, they were so fundamental for every subsequent generation that right up to about the 19th century, you could not be considered an educated person unless you had a very fundamental understanding of the classics. So the history of Western thought and art and literature is so steeped in this time period that, if people don't know it's there, they have a whole levels of understanding that they can't even enjoy and appreciate. And I would say it's sort of like putting on X-ray glasses and you suddenly see that there's this like depth and all of a sudden you're walking past a park and it's not just a pretty sculpture, it's a vengeful goddess, and you're reading a reference in like psychology or something. And all of a sudden it's not just like some obscure reference. It's like a deep and meaningful archetype, a metaphor that like resonates. And so this is like this huge amount of wealth of information, just like here. And people don't even know it. And then I look around and I see people who are frustrated, they're depressed, they're anxious. And I'm not saying that the classics have like just this turnkey solution for everybody's problems, but a lot of the problems people are facing, problems that people have been facing for thousands of years. And it's like, here is this resource, like enjoy it, use it, have it at your disposal, like, take these insights and apply them to your life. So yeah, I sometimes just want to be like, shout at this, at my lungs, like, hey guys, there's this cool information here. Check it out.
That's so cool. I love how you describe it as like a depth, right? Like it's a depth of knowledge. There's just so much there. And then I love to, we echo that a lot on here as well, is like, you're going through something like people have been struggling with stuff for thousands of years. Like what has been working for thousands of years? Let's kind of examine that. But one thing you kind of touched on a little bit, but didn't quite nail down at the beginning, the intro, is that you also are a avid traveler. And you've been to, I think, what did you say, 92 countries, which is extremely impressive. But I wonder how those things kind of overlap. You talk about the depth within classical wisdom. As a former traveler, still living in Panama now, like that is what I would say traveling did for me, is gave me this depth of knowledge and awareness of what's going on in the world. So can you talk about that a little bit, how those two things might overlap?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was kind of born this way. I was born in Norway and I moved to England as a baby. And then I moved to America when I was about 4. And then I went back to Norway when I was 14 and my parents got divorced. My father actually moved to Kazakhstan, spent time in Kazakhstan. I went to boarding school in England, then to Russia. And then from there, I just kept going. So my sense of identity and who I am is always been very complicated. Like I'm a third culture kid. And I think that has a really amazing advantage at times because it means you're always on the outside looking in. I mean, on the negative side, sometimes you never feel like you fit in. And that could be really, really frustrating. And you go to places and you're like, okay, guys, aren't you going to accept me? And then you do something and you're like, why did you do that? That was weird. I was like, no, that's normal for me. I promise. But at the same time, this outside perspective allows you to kind of think and contemplate about ways of living that I think a lot of people just take for granted and don't question. Sometimes I like to think about it in comparison to, say, like Thucydides. Like it was only once he was sort of rejected and exiled by the Athenians that he could report about the Peloponnesian War in a much more unbiased way and he could go between the two different people and kind of really be part of something amazing. So that's one element of it. But also, I was thinking about this recently. We were kind of on a really long road trip in Egypt and many members of the family were not feeling particularly well. And I was sort of looking out and I was, looking at these very different lives. And I was thinking about how that impacts our philosophical perspectives. And I was thinking actually specifically of Stoicism. And there's this moment you get in a car and you're not sure it's going to have a seatbelt and the driver's kind of weaving around and you have to be like, this is out of my control. This is a moment that I have to accept what is in my control, what is not. And this is, I have to kind of just take a step back. But there's so many things, that can provide an insight. And when you travel a lot, like you're very uncomfortable. I mean, sure, there's probably some people who just go to beautiful resorts all the time, and that's great. But for the majority of people who travel, especially kind of big travel, we go away for 4 months at a time. We bring carry-on only, you limit what you have. And when you get to a place, there's infinite things to see. So you have to prioritize, you have to let go of the fact that you can't do everything, you have to want less. Like there's so many really profound Stoic values that kind of are pressed upon you. You have to sleep in a different bed. And, maybe it's not like Marcus Aurelius on the floor, but sometimes it's close, So yeah, I enjoy what it brings.
Oh yeah, that sounds very familiar. And just like, people who've listened, they know that Brendan and I also travel a lot. And sometimes it is exactly as you mentioned, you just got to accept, the situation where you're in, and it might not be like the luxury place that you want to be, but it's something, and you've got to make that, the best place that you can have. And I always feel like we talk here about Stoicism, but there's also a philosophy of travel, right? A little bit what Brendan is like, how do they match? And there's a different kind of way of looking at life. And I love how you said it, that, when you're kind of stuck between worlds, you become an observer, but also a link between them, right? You become kind of a connector. And that's something when I feel like knowledge about other people, how they live, could solve so many problems and just make it all just, that real cosmopolitan belief, right, that the Stoics have, that sympatheia, that interconnectedness. People just travel a little bit more. And I wanted to kind of build on that a little bit. How has that kind of shaped your personal philosophy, and where did your love for philosophy come from?
Well, that's a multi-question. And, I think for love of philosophy, it's sort of hard, I guess, to pinpoint an exact moment. But if I were to say, I do actually recall a time when it was when I was a kid in Kazakhstan, and I was with my brother, and you're in these completely different environments, and it was really, really different. This was the late 90s. It was still, Kazakhstan's probably super rich and developed now, and nothing like the Kazakhstan I enjoyed as a kid. But because you have such a different environment, you have to rely and trust on the people around you. You have to do a lot of problem solving that you don't necessarily do. Like, you can live in your day-to-day life and go to work and never really question or think about things. But when you're thrown into a really different environment, as you say, you're sort of confronted with difference and difficulty, with sometimes poverty, really hardship, but also just problem solving that you have to do. As anyways, I'm thrown in this kind of different environment, and I remember, it was just my brother and there wasn't that many other kids that spoke English. I think we knew like 3, and so we had a lot of chats. And I remember one time he was asking me about, what did I think about? What was the purpose of life? Why are we here? So I've got and I said, I don't know, because I was like a teenage girl at the time, and I was like, whatever. And he's like, you have to think about these things. You really have to think about them. I was like, okay. We would my father was a lover of astronomy, so we'd go up to these observatories and spend the night up in the mountains and just stare at the stars. And I think that's just the natural way everyone kind of historically in the past came to philosophy, just looking up the stars, talking with your family, dealing with hardships, and thinking, how should we live our lives?
And yeah, no, and how did that and did it evolve with traveling? Like, how did it kind of evolve throughout the rest of your life, like when you started out and where you are right now?
Well, I think I didn't go a very traditional route. I loved theater, and I was a big theater geek, and so I think I entered the classical world through Sophocles and Antiquity. And Antigone is such a powerful play that just resonates so deeply with modern audiences, with audiences around the world. It's maybe not so surprising that that's a good entryway into this sort of classical world. And I remember I took in high school a course called like Man and His Measure, which was sort of an introduction to a lot of philosophy. And then when it came to college, I kind of struggled trying to figure out where I wanted to go. And I had a friend whose older sister went to St. John's, which is this very strange philosophy college. And they were like, you'll be perfect for it. And you don't have the traditional structure. It's not like lectures. You just read the great books, you translate them, you learn the ancient languages, and then you sit around a big table and you discuss them. So if you don't have a very linear brain, it's perfect because, it's very dynamic. It's about dialogue and conversations. It's kind of digging into these things. So that was like the most formal philosophical training. And then I finished my degree and everything up in Edinburgh and switched to sociology, which I very much enjoyed, and kind of took a different turn. But I still kept the classics alive in my life because I joined the Classic Society and I directed their plays and still did theater. I set up a theater company in Edinburgh, which is still going and it's part of the Fringe. So I'm very proud of my first baby. Yeah, it was kind of fun when I started classical wisdom because I had a period of my life doing completely different things that were very practical. Like in Dubai, I did like PR. I went and lived in Taiwan and taught English. I just, did completely different jobs so I could travel and be in different places in the world. And so when I started classical wisdom, I kind of had to relearn the classics. But I think that was really fun because I was learning with my audience. And so now I've been doing it every day for 12 years. It's kind of like an extensive PhD program. And I've got the opportunity to talk directly with professors around the world at the highest levels, authors, thinkers, and get one-on-one with them. So I feel like I'm having an education every day. So it's really very honored to get to be part of the great conversation.
I love this like story and how you've pieced it together. And it just sounds like you've had so many unique and different experiences and how you've kind of all brought them together to this place that you are now. But one thing I read that you had said before was that Stoicism is the gateway or can be a gateway into philosophy. And could you explain that and what you meant by that?
I think the actual phrase I usually say is it's the gateway drug. Today,
Okay.
philosophy. And I do think so because Stoicism has been enjoying this rise in popularity, which I think is just fantastic. And it's funny when I talk to, the older philosophers like A.A. Long, for instance, and he's just like bemused. He's like, oh, it was such a niche topic in the 60s. I mean, who would have known? And it's true. It's even in my time partaking in this sort of classics world, to see its rise has been remarkable and fantastic for a philosophy that, has enjoyed at different times renaissances, but has not always historically been so dominating compared to, say, Plato or Socrates or Aristotle. But it's fantastic because I think people kind of learn about this thing. They're like, oh, wow, this is useful. This is helpful. This is changing my perspective on things. If Stoicism can do this, maybe other ones can too, So I think it's a much broader perspective to think about more than one philosophy. I'm really happy that it's like a wedge into thinking about it.
And just to kind of really kind of build on that real quick is because it's been more popular and the rise of Stoicism has been, it still feels like a kind of a niche. Like we offer Stoic coaching and, not a lot of people know what it is. It's like they ask like, oh, are you going to turn me into Stoic or what's happening here? So there's still room for that to build. But what do you think about like this, the rise in popularity, the kind of the good sides, but also the bad sides? Because we can see some of the things that might not be as favorable, not to the philosophy itself, maybe as well, but also to the people who say they claim to use it or profess it in certain ways.
Yeah. And maybe I should tie this back into the previous question you asked about my own personal philosophy. I realize I kind of went a bit tangential on you for that one. Well, one, I think every introduction into philosophy and philosophical thinking is fantastic. And I welcome, all the different people who are getting excited in that space. Two, there is a broader philosophical question about how we're supposed to approach these philosophies and philosophical ideas. I fervently believe that when we're thinking about the ancients, we don't just put them on a pedestal. We don't just say, this is the end all. This is the one solution. Nobody in history is perfect. Nothing is, one solid thing. And when you think about it, Zeno, like the founder of Stoicism, was himself like synthesizing previous philosophies, right? So I feel myself, I'm an eclectic. I like to think of my philosophical things as similar to like the vein of Cicero. Like, I don't think there's one philosophy that's going to give all the answers, not all the answers at all the times in all the people's lives. There's maybe one point in one's life where like Stoicism makes perfect sense. But there's going to be other moments where elements of Epicureanism really reflects. There's going to be other times where like the wisdom of Aristotle resounds. We shouldn't just ignore those just because we picked one philosophy that we like the best right now, because you don't know what you're going to need at what times of your life as well. And I've done a lot of really interesting events, for instance, on death. And Cicero was saying, you really need to prepare for death and loss in advance. And you want to have all of the philosophical ideas and insights in your toolbox ready to use for whatever situation comes your way. So I think Stoicism has a lot of extremely beneficial elements to it. But for those who think of it as the only answer, it's just missing out. Like, it's like, here, I've got a hammer. Well, that hammer is great, but maybe a screwdriver might be useful too. I mean, I don't know, just why not? Give it an idea. I think it's useful just to know what there is and different ways to look at it. And then if at the end of those, you still go, you know what? I really like everything about Stoicism. That's great. That's awesome. But if you never question it, how would you know? So I do think it's really important for people to look beyond just Stoicism, to take advantage of the huge amount of wisdom. I mean, the amount of times I think of just straight to Heraclitus and the pre-Socratics and think about the flux and flow and the constant change. I mean, it doesn't even just have to be like a treatise. Sometimes it can be just one concept, one idea that can be really helpful at one moment in your life. And you just don't know what that moment's going to be before you need it.
And I think that that's also nice what you do with classical wisdom, right? It's not just one stream of philosophy, but everything. And I was just like last week, I was honored to co-teach Stoic Week in the Netherlands. And we had a teacher there who was teaching about Aikido, right? And the philosophy behind it and more of the Buddhist Zen way. And there's so many things that overlap, but also really nice things that it adds, or maybe the things that the Stoicism. I sometimes feel like Stoicism misses a little bit of the love that it actually shows of life when you practice it in the right way. And it's more like, oh no, Stoicism is like this, what the classical, like, oh, you're stone-faced wall and nothing hurts me. But if you really do it the right way, then at least I've experienced it as a very positive, very loving philosophy. And that's when I listened to the story of the Aikido. A teacher was there. He's like, wow, this is amazing. There's all these other aspects. So that's something that I definitely love. And also when you said, like, if you never question what you believe, then you pretty much stop, philosophizing, and you pretty much stop what you're doing in your tracks. And how do you feel like when, and I've talked to other people about this as well, when we look at the self-help, the kind of movements, and what do you feel? Because I do think that we have a responsibility in our day of age to bring the philosophy to now. And that's something that I see that you're doing with classical wisdom as well. What do you feel like your role is in that? And how do you see the self-help genre kind of help, or maybe not help people as much?
I guess I'm not really an expert on the whole realm of self-help. I can easily see the crossover. I mean, philosophy, I think, is at its nature a lot of ways of how to be a better person. And that's one of the things that I love about specifically ancient philosophy. I think when you get to modern philosophy, I really appreciate what they're trying to do in system building and creating new terminology and stuff, but it can detach from reality a bit. I mean, it's interesting, but one of the beauties about ancient philosophy is it just is really relatable and understandable and getting to the heart of it. And it's like what makes a good friend? Like, that's fundamental to happiness. And like, that's Aristotle 101. Like, he wrote a whole book on this. Like, what's a good friend? Okay. How should we be a good citizen or part of our community? Like, so there's a lot of things. How do we live the good life so we can find happiness? Like, in that is 100% self-help, right? I mean, that's a good Venn diagram. But I think one of the added benefits of philosophy is it has a depth. And so I think sometimes self-help can be limiting in that it perhaps makes the individual just focus on themselves all the time. And I'm not an expert on self-help. So maybe there's somebody who's like, self-help doesn't do that. And you know what? Fair enough. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that. But I think the nice thing about philosophy as a broader discipline is that it genuinely isn't a discipline. It's a way of thinking about the world. So it's not just about how can I be a better person? It's also, how should we think about the world? How should we interact with each other? Where do we come from? Like, thinking about bigger questions. And I think sometimes we live in an overly individualistic, self-absorbed society, and sometimes taking a step out of ourselves and not thinking about ourselves, but rather the bigger pictures is actually the thing that will make people a lot happier.
Absolutely. What do you think is a kind of practical way that someone can do that? Because I agree with you. I do think that that's what, kind of the problem in the self-help industry is sometimes it gets a little bit too granular, whereas philosophy has this idea of giving us the view from above and that sort of thing. But if I'm someone that wants to kind of start getting less, self-centered and more about the community or more about, society at large, how do you think I can do that?
I think reading, you could read some of the ancient books, but you can also just read literature about other people's lives. I mean, sometimes taking a step out of ourselves is the perfect thing to do. I think interacting with people, one of the things I find, depending on the society I'm in, is people live very isolated lives. It's one of the things I love about Buenos Aires in Argentina. It's, you know the names of your grocery store people and you talk to them regularly, and the fishmonger makes jokes to your kid, and it's much more interactive. And to be honest, most of the time when I go to the US, for instance, I find that all of those daily interactions are sort of stripped away, and it's hard. That's lonely. That's isolating. So I understand that a lot of people are kind of having a hard time with that. So I think getting outside of ourselves and finding ways to interact and be part of a community and be part with our family and spend time with our friends and like have real interactions, I think that's like, again, that's Aristotle 101, So, I mean, yes, I don't know, maybe that's not the answer you're looking.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, I think it's not supposed to be something big and amazing, right? It's a simple thing, like more human interaction. Like as you have more human interaction, I think you start to see the world from someone else's perspective a little more, and that just opens your window a little bit more to the outside situations. No, so I think that's wonderful, and that is one thing I do think that travel has done. I think travel is kind of the best education. It's just like reading books. It obviously puts you in different places and different locations, and that's where you can kind of get the learning, right? Really take the juice out of life. I feel like is when those moments when you do feel uncomfortable, and oftentimes that can be in these sort of interactions, especially as you travel to different cultures and things like that. But yeah, as we kind of like shift as far as, is Stoicism for you, is that kind of your guiding philosophy, or is there other ones that you really lean into a lot outside of Stoicism?
Yeah, I mean, I was mentioning to Benny, I feel very eclectic is definitely my perspective. And I like, I think it's important to be selective and to find the best elements in different philosophies. And rather than seeing this as like picky or capricious, I think it's actually like arguing with the ancients is as part of a very storied tradition of this great conversation. I like to think of it's really funny because you think the Romans, would argue with the ancient Greeks that had come hundreds of years beforehand, and then you think of like Petrarch and the beginning of the Renaissance. He would like write letters yelling, you didn't do this part right. And then you think of the founding fathers in America. Similarly, they had long, deep discussions about whether Epicurus was right or Plato. And so I think it's really important to argue with these texts and to question them. So there are large swaths of Stoicism that I find super valuable in definitely a practical way. I really like the in your control, your control. I like the virtues. I like thinking about those in your interactions, the 10,000-foot view. I mean, there's lots of, I like the idea of self-assessment and journaling and holding ourselves accountable. I think those are really, really valuable. But, I really appreciate a lot of like Epicurean perspectives on day-to-day life. Our lives can pass very quickly. And if we don't take moments to be grateful and appreciate really small things, it will just pass us by. And so I always think one of my perfect examples is like drinking a cup of coffee when it's the exact right temperature. And just taking a moment and being like, this is nice. I always say, I love cheersing, not only because I'm fond of a glass or two, but also because it's so being present in a way that, it's good to have dreams and plan for the future. It's good to make sense of our past, but to literally say cheers is right now, this moment, we are here, we are alive. And it's interesting because when I think of other cultures, like this is something I think the Japanese do really well. Like we're going to take the daily, the quotidian, and turn it into art. Like it's not just pouring your cup of tea, it is a ceremony. Like every small gesture, like you're not just giving somebody money, you're presenting them like these small interactions, these small moments of our lives to take a moment and think about them and enjoy them because that's what our life is usually composed of. So that's definitely another one that I really enjoy. I think also for me, I find elements of skepticism really, really important. And I think one of the struggles we have in sort of modern culture a lot of times is you hear everybody say, I know this. And then this is also Socrates, of course, like, I do not claim to know that which I do not know. This is fundamental for learning. And when I try to teach some philosophical concepts to kids, for instance, to my daughter, this is one of the first things I'm like, first, like, hey, you can be a really smart kid, but you're never going to learn something if you think you already know it. And kids kind of, you have to teach them that. But the amazing thing is that adults don't seem to know that either. And as I say, I get this great honor and fortune to talk to all these really amazing professors and intellectuals, and the amount of times they say, I don't know. And I'm like, this is a fundamental part of skepticism, and not knowing how much we know, to accept what we don't know, to be open-minded so that we can learn more. So those are just a few other examples of ideas that I like to incorporate in my philosophical mindset.
I like that, right? And just to have those different people. And that's also something that I wanted to quickly ask you as well, is like, do you have a favorite philosopher or someone to spar with who you might want to write letters to, or who you want to have that cup of coffee with? Who do you go to? You mentioned Aristotle a few times, but who would you go to? Like, say, I want to kind of challenge this topic.
Well, I get angry with Aristotle on certain points. My biggest, bugaboo is that he didn't count how many teeth women have correctly. It just infuriates me. And I'm like, he's so well known for his rationale and his clear thinking. And then he just says women have less teeth than men, like swine. You're like, come on, really? You couldn't just say hey, Evania, come here, let me count your teeth. I also get very frustrated with Plato. The concept of the republic, I think, is fundamentally not good for political structures. It's definitely very elitist. And his reality, he had this great dream and idea of a utopia, but then he actually went to Syracuse and tried to teach the tyrant Dionysius how to be like a philosopher king, and that backfired badly. So it is good to remember that you can have all the greatest theories in the world, but if they don't actually work in reality, then that's definitely something to take into account. So, but of ones I really like, I would love to talk to Heraclitus, because he wrote his philosophy as poetry. I think that would just be beautiful. And I think it would be really fun to meet Thales of Miletus, one of the very first philosophers, because I feel like he had a really great sense of humor. And I don't know if your listeners know the kind of story, but he was this great sage, and people would say to him, well, you're so smart. How come you're poor? And he was like, okay, well, I could be rich if I wanted to. So he predicted that it was going to be a good crop year, and so he either bought out or rented out all of the olive presses in advance, and then it was the first stock options. So I feel like he would have a good wit and banter to have a good discussion with.
That sounds amazing, and there's still so much more to read, right? Like Heraclitus, I just read everything that's left of him, and that was, as you said, just poetry, right? It's just all the words and how he uses, but also the thoughts that he has, and then it's kind of, it's great that you can see it coming back from Marcus Aurelius, right? How he uses those words and more like the flux and the change. I really enjoy that one as well. But there's so much more to read, and I'm sure that you have a lot of, sources on your website, right? Where also the listeners can go to find all of that. And it's nice that you have those sparring moments with yourself. And you talked a little bit about, the reason why you got angry with Aristotle, right? He didn't count, the women's teeth. Was this something again, I just don't get it as well. You want to know the answer, definitely, right? Someone like him. But, and kind of to segue that as well, how do you feel are there what are the role models of female women, the women that come from the classics to now?
Well, I mean, it is hard to find the same depth of women to choose from. And I mean, I definitely appreciate that we look for them, the ones that have kind of been forgotten, and to reinvent them, because at different times in the ancient world, women did have a much higher standing than even in the classical world. You go back to the Bronze Era and you see many more temples dedicated to Hera than Zeus. And, it's not a one-way story. So I do like that there's been an attempt to kind of see a lot of these female voices, but there are just obviously less to choose from. If I were to actually pick my favorites, some of them are not philosophers. I am a huge Cleopatra fan, I won't lie. She, was the first of the 9 generations of Ptolemaic rulers who actually learned Egyptian. She spoke 9 languages. As a ruler, she was extremely effective. I mean, she, yes, her family was pretty bloody and violent, and anybody who kind of went up against her reign managed to sort of disappear. But the people didn't riot. There was a lot of indicators that she was a pretty good ruler, and I just think she's cool. To be fake. But with philosophy, I think also Hypatia, I just think is her presence and contributions, and she has some like wicked cool comebacks as well that are fantastic. Her death is pretty grisly though, gotta say. That kind of leaves a bit of a gut punch when talking about her. And there are, of course, like Aspasia, who, there's a lot of these women who have been tainted by their contemporaries or later biographers as sort of prostitutes, courtesans, same thing, like Cleopatra was very sexualized, but in fact were very prominent intellectuals of their day and age. So I'm glad to see a lot of these women getting justice finally. But and I suspect with the trend of academic endeavors, we'll find even more great stories from the ancient world.
Thank you for that answer. That's really good. I'm glad you brought that up. I think Cleopatra is a great example. I do find the history in her whole reign to be extremely interesting. But I understand that too, as it being tough to kind of find those references with philosophy. I mean, especially in the ancient times, being very male dominated, very, pretty much exclusively male led. And then now we have a resurgence of Stoicism happening now, which I think is also something similar, very, very male dominated, very male led. And we need as much female influence in this space as we can get because of that fact. So I wonder, like, what would be kind of your plea to other females that interested in philosophy, interested in Stoicism specifically? Why study philosophy? Why go down that journey?
Well, I think it's for everyone. I mean, I think philosophy is genuinely, I think the biggest thing for me is to kind of tell people, like, this doesn't have to be boring. This isn't something that has to, like, some long academic treatise that you have to sit in a boring classroom with a dusty, books and things like that. It's a really exciting and fun world to get into. And so many of the stories are just, I mean, you read them, you're like, why haven't they made a movie of this? Why haven't they made a movie of this? What? Yeah, there's so many great stories that once you kind of forget the sort of narrative that this is only supposed to be for that person, everybody will find something that is really fun and exciting about it. And I think that's to not let that barrier be in your way, if it is, because and Stoicism, I think, is valuable no matter where you are in your life. It's definitely like, hey, if you're a young mom, it's going to be helpful. If you're, dealing with aging parents, it's going to be helpful. If you're stressed out with work or trying to deal and navigate, it's going to be helpful. Like, so I think that these are tools that will help people. And one of my sort of goals at Classical Wisdom is to, like, just show people how fun and exciting it is, and to kind of translate a lot of the amazing ideas that do come out of the classroom. Like, I love talking to the professors and just bring them to the everyday, to the everyman, to everyone, to kind of bring it full circle with regards to, like, travel. One thing I love about Classical Wisdom is we're really international. I think we're read in 198 countries. If you know somebody in the Congo, tell them to start reading us. I mean, we've only got a few left. So I think it's also important to remember that the classical world was super diverse. There were a lot of women involved. There were people of all sorts of different backgrounds, politically, religiously, ethnically, linguistically, and that today it's still the case. Like, this is a shared humanity. Like, people are interested around the world in this. Like, there is a cool skeptic society in Brazil. Like, there is a huge, like, group of Plato lovers in China. Like, I've got readers in the Tonga, which maybe now they live in New Zealand since the volcano. But just to say, this is something that we can all take part in. And it's important because we want to have this information, these ideas for the next generation, because they will benefit us, but we need them. And the only way we'll have these for future generations is if people care about them in the first place. So that's kind of another part of our mission, is just to remind people that we don't want history to disappear. Like, last week, I was walking on the site of the Library of Alexandria, and that's one of the most devastating losses, for humanity. And we don't want something like that to happen again. This is a collective effort.
And we're still hoping for those scrolls in Herculaneum to be deciphered, right? To get some more of the text that we've lost. And I think that's and we've held, like, spaces on X where we had live conversations with a lot of people. I was so surprised that there's so many women who are identifying with Stoicism, but also the value of information I received, because you get it from a completely new perspective, as you said, to be like a mom, but just, and I think that's why it's a little bit it's a shame that we that the philosophy is more like a male dominated sector, right? It's like because it's maybe locked in that ivory tower where it's like, oh, let's discuss all of these things. But the value as humanity we could have for all of us to discuss these things and to listen to all sides and to say, hey, this is what I'm getting from. Oh, really? Wow, that's super interesting, right? So that's why we're also like hoping, to promote more women to come on here. And we've had a lot of great conversations already. And, and then seeing you do what you do with classical wisdom, I think that's amazing, right? That, again, that link. What would you kind of, again, how would you see that in ahead of you, like that kind of where we are right now with the philosophy? Where would you like to see it go and take off from here?
I mean, I've been saying for a while, I think the classics are coming in for a comeback. I mean, I genuinely do. I think, sadly, the reason for that is because I think a lot of people are very unhappy right now. And they're saying, wait a second, this status quo isn't working. Where am I going to find some answers? And the classics are genuinely a good place to go. And it has, as I was saying before, like these different conversations, it has kickstarted renaissances many times now. So I think it is a really, really valuable resource. And I think for people to think about these bigger ideas and to, you talk about the 10,000 foot view, like in Stoicism, but I find that reading any classical work is like stepping out of your own time period and getting a much bigger perspective, like immediately. It's like jumping into the sublime. And I think people will really benefit from that. So I am hoping that it's getting a resurgence. It's also getting a resurgence in regards to classical education and the way people are approaching teaching ancient Greek and Latin and making them sort of living languages again. And I think this is really fundamental because each generation needs to have direct contact to those original texts. So if we lose the languages, then we lose that contact. But each time we come to those original texts again in a different time periods, we will take new relevant information from them, so we want kids from all over the world and all sorts of backgrounds to be able to commune directly with these ancient works. And again, until really only a couple hundred years ago, like most very educated people spoke Latin or Greek. Like it used to be the requirements to get into the Ivy League. So we do want to keep these languages alive so that we have direct contact with these texts so that we can be inspired by them and commune with them and engage with them.
Oh, that's so cool. No, thank you. Well said.
It's a literal level of the mind.
I appreciate just your passion for this sort of realm. And it's such a joy having these sort of conversations with people that have that passion. So thank you for that. And thank you for creating classical wisdom and carrying it along for over a decade. So thank you for that as well. And keep doing that. But as we start to wrap it up, I just want to make sure that, the guests can find you and know where to look for you. So if you do want to share what you're working on now, where people can find you, that would be wonderful.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I said I love the mutualness. It's always fun to talk about this stuff. But yeah, you can find me at Classical Wisdom. We're on Substack, so classicalwisdom.com or classicalwisdom.substack.com. We do have a YouTube channel as well as, on the various social medias if you want to engage in the classical world in that format. And we have a free newsletter so people could sign up. And we, like I said, we try to give a little bit of everything. So a little bit of mythology, a little bit of history, a little bit of philosophy, because they do all kind of interconnect and they reinforce and build and show more for each other. So a little bit of understanding of each makes each one more powerful. So definitely check us out and have fun. I think the best way to get into this sort of world is just, one idea at a time, one article at a time, one book at a time, one conversation at a time, and just go from there.
Yeah, and this was a great conversation that can help with that, right? At least I enjoyed it. I'm heading off to Greece in a little bit where you are in a few weeks, and you've inspired me to maybe go and learn ancient Greek. That's then I can read the other half of Diogenes Laertes, right, where you have the English and the other one. And again, you don't have the filter of the translator, but then you can see it through your own eyes. I think that's a wonderful addition there as well, right? To get the knowledge from the pure source that would really give that depth. So I appreciate you for being here as well and giving us the time to listen to you, and definitely implore people, go to Classical Wisdom and get all the wisdom there you can get from the website and the writing. Thank you for listening to the Via Stoica Podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and leaving a review. Your feedback will help us reach more like-minded people on the journey to self-improvement. If you want to get in touch with us or find more information, you can go to viastoica.com, your one-stop platform for all things Stoicism and living better. And remember, virtue is the only good.